Definitely blended finance is a big part of how you can help accelerate development in the area. And what I mean by blended finance is how do you utilize the different types of capital built together to try and de-risk both the projects but also the participation of different investors. The energy sector is our largest sector in terms of where we've invested a lot of capital in Africa. So from an M300 perspective, a lot of things like how do we accelerate investments in transmission? How do we accelerate investment in distribution? We set up a company in 2018 called GridWorks, and GridWorks is very much focused in this area. So we see that as a big enabler to help some of the countries in their ambition around the M300. The other key area that we're also focused on is power generation. So we're doing the generation side, but we're also doing the transmission and distribution. So basically everything along the value chain of energy to ultimately get access to the end users is a big part of what BII is involved in. And if I look at how much have we invested in the space, since 2017, we've invested over $1 billion of BII's money in that space. So for me, this opportunity is one around reinforcing our commitments in the sector, reinforcing our commitments to our partners, reinforcing our commitment to fellow DFIs who we also work with to fund all these projects. In my 20 plus years of delivering infrastructure across the continent, the biggest area I continue to see as a bottleneck is in transmission and distribution. So I think there's a lot of generation capacity in terms of production of energy. The issue is how do you then move the energy from where it's been produced ultimately to where it's needed and to be utilized. So we've seen over the years lack of investment in that space. The reason we set up GridWorks was to be an enabler and to be a developer, to work with partners to actually try and make projects in that space. So that's where we've seen the biggest challenge. Over the last 10 years, we've also seen that as the biggest opportunity because what we've seen is governments are not able to finance these projects as they did historically. So it's now around one, do we have the right teams and resource and expertise? And then how do you match that with the type of capital needed? So the two type of capitals we've been providing. Risk capital, which is early stage equity development that you need to get this project developed. And then when those projects are now developed and ready to be invested, our capital, and then mobilizing other capital. So transmission distribution and the whole distributed renewable energy space. The skill in terms of the right type of team who have the expertise, and then the right type of capital. So those three to me are the immediate big things I see as challenges but opportunities for where we can play a key role. So we as a DFI, we are able to take certain risks that the private sector isn't able to take. So by bringing our, let's say, high risk equity, we're able to then take the project to a point where it can attract maybe more commercial capital. Our role is to kick things off, start it off, and then at some point step out and allow the private sector to sustain it. Let me pick two examples, and actually just not far off the meeting I just had. So BII in 2018 invested in GridWorks. GridWorks has then recently about 2-3 years ago, made an investment in a company called Anzana Energy, which was previously called Virunga Energy. And they've created a company called Weza Power. And Weza Power is piloting in Burundi to look to invest $60 million to try and build out the distribution infrastructure in Burundi. To ultimately use that to try and create a model that we think can then be replicated in other countries on the continent. So that's taking risk capital and then using that to develop a project and then look to crowd in other forms of capital. That's specific projects. More broadly, and actually today, BII is launching a facility. We were given a £100 million facility by the UK government for mobilization. So today we're launching alongside Mercer, basically a call to asset managers to come and bid for £50 million of capital that we see that will help mobilize, say, the City of London commercial capital. So again, one is around specific projects and crowding in investors in there, but also using this £50 million facility alongside Mercer, working with us, to try and use that to try and see how asset managers can bring proposals forward of how we can mobilize more money with that £50 million. So we've been investing in emerging developed markets for 76 years. So there's an element around consistency in policy, clarity in strategy, and a bit of focus on partnership. So our policy is very clear on what our mandate is, which countries we can invest in, and then the type of partners that we need to work alongside us to deliver our strategy. So we work on a 5-year kind of strategic framework. Our strategy framework for this period ends in 2026. So for me, I'm very clear on what my mandate and focus area is. So for anyone engaging with us, there's clarity. I think the second thing, again, within that context, is climate. So as BII, 30% of our capital as a minimum has to be climate finance eligible transaction. So for us, we see the climate space as a big space for us to continue to invest in. We are a supporter of the Global Climate Initiative, ultimately around how to get to, within our mandate, net zero by 2030. And then I think the third thing is mobilization. I think for us, we remain focused on the fact that, we've been able to crowd in, I think, about $1.12 billion so far. How can we do more? Because the gap, we're here about how do you electrify and give access to 300 million Africans by 2030. I invest roughly about $1 billion a year in Africa across different sectors. That alone isn't going to help bridge the gap. So the mobilization agenda for me, irrespective of policies or others, remains a key focus. And therefore it's around partnership with the right governments, partnership with the right similar institution, and partnership with the private sector to really help crowd in capital to help address the gap in the space.